Recording has started.
Okay.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to have a conversation. Nice to see you after so many years. My name is Fariborz Birjandian. I'm the CEO of Calvi Catholic Immigration Society, known as CCIS. I'm also doing a lot of volunteer work. I do, obviously, in the field of immigration, settlement, human rights issues. I'm currently the chair of Alberta Immigrant Serving Agency Alberta. I'm a vice chair with the national organization called CCIS, and I do quite a bit of work around settlement, and I've been involved with UNHCR quite a bit. And there has been a book written by UNHCR for the best practices. I've been part of that. I get a chance to go and talk about the Canadian experience on refugee resettlement. At least in the past 5 years, I've been to Geneva 3 times to talk about it. I've been to Germany to train and to share our experience in German NGOs. So I keep myself quite involved with the refugee resettlement. I think part of that is because I became a refugee in 1987 myself, and that started my being a technocrat, more of a businessman, to become a refugee or a social worker, which I'm a social worker actually, but in the field of social work, more in the area of resettlement, integration of immigrants as well as the refugees.
Thank you. So could you talk now about what some of the challenges and needs are in terms of refugee settlement through your years of experience? What are some of the key things that you're seeing that influence refugee resettlement?
I think, again, when the refugees, I mean, I'm again could talk about my own experience. Refugees usually they don't plan to become refugees, so it happens. So once it happens, obviously, I always say that the refugees are created when the humanity really fails us collectively, and people lose what they had, and they're forced to move from a location or the place that they were born, lived, and have a life now to another strange environment, mostly hostile environment. So obviously that itself creates a whole different psychic. It becomes quite a lot of fear for the families, for members of families. It also depends on what happens prior to people actually becoming refugees. But definitely, there are two different stories. There are people that they go through severe persecution before they actually decide to leave, and there are people that things like happens to them, like a war. Suddenly the bombing starts and people start moving out. So there are different psychic of the people when you look at how they became refugee, what experience they had prior to that. But definitely in a very short phrase, if I want to summarize it, when we become refugee, obviously there's a huge amount of fears that you have. You move to an environment that are not friendly usually, and you are trying to protect yourself, your family. It's just a time of confusion. And if you've been subjected to trauma and persecution and torture, obviously that adds into the whole baggage of fears that people have with them. So as we know, people move usually to a first stage, which is a neighboring country that they move to. And again, I don't want to get into too detail of that, but the UNHCR, United Nations High Commission Refugees, they have 3 solutions for the durable solution for refugee resettlement, which is first, obviously, repatriations. And we know historically that happened to a number of groups, especially Afghanis, because there are huge numbers that they were repatriated. Local integration, and the last really solution is resettlement. And we know there are only 25 countries that actually are signees to the convention, 1953 convention, that actually agreed to resettle refugees. Those are the refugees that the other first 2 solution, which is repatriation, local integration, does not work with them, and they get resettled in a number of countries. I mean, it's not that many countries, really, 25 countries, and Canada is being one of the leading countries in that area. So when you look at how people move, again, it all depends on family composition. Is a single person, is a couple, or family with the children? So obviously that the scenario changes, the journey changes, but definitely refugees that are resettled, they are the one that they cannot go back, they cannot locally be integrated. But you also have to remember, out of 60 million people that we are considered as by UNHCR as displaced or people that been recognized as refugee, only 120,000 at the best are position available for resettlement. So out of 60 million people, only and very really not even 2% that they get a chance to resettle in a country like Canada. And so what happens there, obviously, the selection process that across the world, people are coming, different countries, including Canada, have a quota of how many people they can bring to their country. And still U.S. brings the largest number by far, but Canada, I think, is doing its best collectively between the private sponsors as well as the government sponsors. We can talk about 10 to 12,000 people a year. So it's not really a huge number when you look at the 60 million people that are displaced. And it's unfortunate because when I became refugee in 1987, the numbers was about 25 million, 30 million. Now it has doubled in the past 30 years. So it's not something that we can be very proud of. So the world in respect to refugees has not become a better place to live. So there are more refugees being produced. So basically, somebody who has become refugee, obviously, I think the notion is that there's nowhere to go back. So they have, obviously, to move forward and to move forward. And if you want me to really focus that we talked about that really the refugees that are being resettled in a country like Canada, obviously, when they go through this huge process, I mean, some refugees, they've been in the camp or displaced for many years, suddenly they get a chance to come to Canada. Talking about Canadian Immigration and Refugee Act, I think there are different stream of refugees coming to Canada. I mean, one is government-sponsored refugees that now we are looking at about 6,000 people coming through that process. But remember, in early 80s, we used to have 14,000, but now the numbers have actually been reduced by quite substantially. Then we get a refugee being sponsored by community. We call them privately sponsored refugees. That actually is quite a unique experience in Canada that Canadians have actually demonstrated over years of that there are communities willing to engage refugees and bring refugees, cover the cost and help them to integrate, which is actually is amazing story. And that happens through about 75 sponsor agreement holders that they have a contract with the federal government. There are criteria and required to be met. So they become a refugee sponsor group, and Calgary Catholic Immigration Society organization that I work for, historically in partnership with the Diocese of Calgary, they have done amazing work. So I just can tell you 80 to 85% of refugees coming to Calgary through a sponsorship agreement holder comes through CCIS and the Roman Catholic Diocese of Calgary and Southern Alberta. And then we also have another group that's called refugee claimants, that these people, based on the Constitution, that when they come to Canada, they have the right to claim to be a refugee, and there's a whole government process to take them through that process that sometimes takes over a few years to determine if they are legitimate refugee, and if they are, then they would be granted refugee status and they become a landed immigrant in Canada. So that number used to be huge, used to be 30,000, 40,000 a year. Let's say 10 years ago, due to the changes, security concern, and more control overseas. So that number has also reduced substantially. But obviously, these are the people, they can afford to pay huge amount of money to smugglers usually, and they come through that process to Canada. Once they land in Canada, they actually apply for refugee claim and they go through process. So it's important to recognize that there are really three distinct processes. Within this process, you may have other processes, but these are the main three ways that people can come to Canada and basically start their life as a landed immigrant, but being called refugees.
Thank you for that explanation and introduction. It really sets up well an understanding of the refugee resettlement process generally, and then also how Canada fits into that process. So you've been working with refugee. You have been a refugee yourself. You've been working with refugees for a long time. Your organization has an incredible amount of experience in doing that work. So over this time period, you've seen some patterns, I'm sure, in terms of issues and needs related to refugee resettlement. And I'd like for you to share with us what some of those patterns and needs are more generally, and then we'll come back and talk about what some of the unique needs might be of the Syrian refugees.
Sure. I think the way I look at it, again, as you said, I have spent a lot of time into this, and it is very dear to me. And I think I look at it as really a social science because people move. The whole global movement is part of social science, which hasn't really developed well yet. There are lots of people moving, everybody goes, and refugees are just a very small portion of that movement. There are some fundamentals that I have learned in the past 30 years being a refugee and being involved with refugee settlement. The really successful refugee settlement is about the refugee and the community and the host community. This is really the fundamental. And that's why you see in some countries, some cities, they have done much better than others. And that really speaks to the community that which they would actually join. So this is fundamental. This is one of the fundamentals about refugees as well as the community that they go to. The other one is that refugees usually have fears, and I've talked about it, huge amount of fears, unknown. And again, when I decided to leave Iran because I'm not Muslim and I was being forced to be convert to Islam, and I didn't have I didn't want to do it. Nothing wrong with Islam, but I was not interested. So when we became a refugee, I understand when I moved, and I was somebody who traveled quite a bit, but I always had the fear and the question why anybody would really care. That I wanted to have a principle, I wanted to keep it. Now I expect everybody to help me. So I think that is, I'm sure most refugees, they have that whole question, does anybody really care about me and my children? I think the good news is, yes, people care. I mean, I stayed for about 13 months in Pakistan as a refugee, and people over there, although they really had not much to offer to us as far as the resources goes, but they really cared. They provided us a safe environment. They allowed us to live there. They were very kind to us. So I think that is a good news. So this one fear I had was, if I go to Pakistan, would people really be hostile? Can I live peacefully in a neighborhood? Did I get processed to go to another place? The answer was yes. People were really good to us. So then it comes with the fear and hopes. Really, that's another fundamental, I would say. And it doesn't matter if it's a first country of asylum or if you go to a country like Canada. As a professional, as a community, we really have to identify those fears and those hopes and try to devise program engagement. Whatever we do should be focused on eliminating those fears, which I will talk about later on in focus in our context. But also there are hopes. That there are not much of hopes, but I'm sure as a human being, we always rely on each other. We hope that somebody would care and help us. And then we build on that hope. I think this is really two fundamental that I have learned. And then in between, government has policy, they have resources. We as a professional organization doing resettlement of refugee, we basically facilitate that whole process more than anything else. We don't settle people, we facilitate the settlement. The entire settlement process happens by refugee themselves and the people and the community that we engage them. So this is those fundamental in a very short sentences I can describe. So everything we do at CCIS, again, because of that learning that we collectively have, is based on that, all the programming that we have, all the processes that we have. And again, there are some limitations, as you probably can appreciate. When people come in, there are obviously resources are available, but are limited. So how can we facilitate a healthy and durable and long-term success for refugees within the limitation that we have? There are communities that not everybody is appreciating what happens around refugees. How can we have more of people, they don't agree with that, even part of that process? So those become kind of question depending where the refugees are resettling. So these are two fundamental that I think that are important. I think identifying their fears, try to eliminate them, and try to build on the hopes that they have for their future, and also making the community receptive and community aware of why these people are becoming refugees. I think when you look at the research, refugees actually do quite well. Refugees, they make good citizens. All the research has been done because they really have nowhere to go. So that is what they need to look forward. And refugees are usually are very appreciative of the help they get. I mean, in a Canadian context, obviously being a country that refugee resettlement goes back to 100 years of experience, starting with Ukrainian, with Mennonite, with the Polish, with Kosovar. So it's not a new phenomenon for Canada, but definitely it is something that we can see that people, they came to this country, like let's say Ukrainian, thousands of Ukrainian came to Canada in a short period of time, and now we have amazing community, very much Canadian, very much part of this country. Looking at the experience of refugees from Vietnam, I'm sure that's where actually started the organization that I work for, CCIS, started. I'm sure when those people came, a lot of people were just maybe looking at them and say, oh my God, how are they going to make it? But look at that. They are amazing community. The children are professional. They are very loyal Canadian. And I think that goes with I could say with all the refugee groups that have come to Canada.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I really like your framing about the hopes and fears. Yep. And the complementarity about that. And then also I think the point that you made around that, what the role is in terms of facilitating resettlement, and that the refugees and the community are the key actors in that resettlement process. What are some of the barriers you think that influence refugee resettlement?
I think the barrier goes back to how prepared our communities are. I mean, the more your communities are prepared, so obviously there will be less barriers. That is really how I would look at it. When I came here, I remember 1988, I arrived here and I actually got into this job right away. And in 1989, and even in Calgary, we had problem opening a bank account for refugees because none of the banks were willing to open bank account for them. As simple as that. Now you tell people in Calgary, they won't believe it, but that was the reality. Because the community didn't understand who these people are. The bank didn't care, and they didn't want to have the headache of somebody depositing, few $100 a month and going there and asking for services that the bank didn't want to deal with it. Obviously, we had to overcome that barriers. I remember we actually went all the way to Toronto to the head offices, and we raised hell. We said that is not acceptable. So obviously things change. Now we are at the point I can tell you that actually there's a huge competition between the banks to come. They're coming to us and they want to help the refugees. So they do program. They bring Arabic speaking. They gave us donation. I'm getting actually a 10,000 donation for Scotiabank today. The RBC has given us money. All other banks. So as you can see. Well, just one example, 30 years ago, 28 years ago, we had a community that they really didn't understand it. Now we have a community that I have actually to pick between the bank to say which one is better or which one can offer more services. So answering the question about barriers is really depends on how prepared the community is. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect is the leadership. I think the leadership is extremely important in the community. I give you an example of a Calgary situation. As I said, the Diocese of Calgary, they do basically are one of the third largest sponsor agreement holders in the country. So the role that the bishop plays in the city is amazing. I mean, I meet with him and I tell him, listen, we have to be careful. We are putting too many applications. But he tells me, look at it. Just look at those people you are helping. So that message coming from that level of leadership in the community, and I know he's going to support that, he's going to go to these parishes, going to talk to people, and he's going to get the help for us. And that's why we bring so many people. But if I had a bishop that would say, oh, I don't want to have that much to do, or let's just do 20 a year, then we would not have actually, in the last 3 years, we almost brought about 850 Iraqis to Calgary, and they are doing fine. They're amazing. So leadership becomes very important. I use the Bishop Henry as an example because I really admire his leadership in that area. But also it goes all over. It goes to our agency leadership, my board, the mayor of the city, our business community. So those are two aspects, I would say. If you create that, it takes time. I think we have to be very honest with people. Refugee resettlement is not an easy task. It's a process. It's a long-term process. We understand that. These people are not going to come in and in next month become contributing members financially to our community, but it's a long-term investment. And the good news with us in Canada is we have lots of good story, good success story. So I would say those are two elements that there are barriers. Now, as I said, the settlement itself, I mean, when you go to a new country, even if you don't go as a refugee, you have a lot of challenges. I mean, so I don't want to say, if I look at the challenges that we have in just moving from point A, which is familiar, you speak the language, to another place that you have to start all over as a barrier is a part of the challenge. As a human being, we take on. But how we can remove those challenges that people have, like language, for instance. Now, obviously, people coming and they may not speak the language. So how our institution are going to be prepared and ready to actually provide services for these people, although they don't speak the official language. So those are the things, and I can speak to the, let's say one example, the school boards, both Catholic as well as the public school in Calgary, they have done an amazing job. I mean, past 40 days, they have assessed over 300 children. I mean, children of refugees coming to Calgary about maybe 40, 50 days ago, they're actually going to school. So this is how I look at it. Have we removed all the barriers? No, because again, the parents that we have, that they may not speak, I mean, they don't speak any English, and they just don't know even where they are really. I mean, if you look at it, 10 days ago, they were in a camp. After 3 years, somebody called them, they say, now you're going to Canada. So now they got 5, 6 kids that are going to school. These are all the barriers, all the challenges. How can I educate these parents about this? There's a lot of details that has to be done well. As I said, with the right environment, right leadership, then it produces at the end of the day. And we have evidence that it has worked. Again, one of the example, I came as a refugee. My children were refugee children, 3 and 6 at the time. But now I don't think there are anything else than Canadian. So, or you look at all these Vietnamese children that they came to Canada, all the young people that they came from Ireland many years ago, that's fantastic. So we have done quite a good job, I think, resettling refugees. But again, we have to remember it's a process, it's a long-term investment. You need the right leadership, and also empowering people, making sure that they understand that it's going to be a tough journey. And the community has to be patient, be hospitable, and I think overall we have that environment in Canada.
Okay, thank you. You talked earlier about just in terms of when people come to Canada as refugees, sometimes you've got people who are coming as single individuals, and then you've also got families, and you talked about, families with children. What difference does that sort of family composition make in terms of refugee resettlement?
I think, obviously, again, I don't have to make an example. If you travel to, let's say, Paris with your husband only or your partner, is a different story if you take 6 children with you. So that's the same thing, as simple as that. So when people come here as a single or couple with one child, obviously it is much easier for them to go through the process because that whole family dynamic is different. The human capital that they bring in, obviously it is all utilized. But when you have, in the case of Syrian refugee that we've been speaking to about the government-sponsored refugee, when you have a family that they come with 8 children, and the parents are both illiterate, even in their own languages, so that becomes a huge challenge for community and for the agency like CCIS and other agency that making sure that these people get the support they need. And again, I will speak shortly about the refugees, Syrian refugee, because we're getting very clearly 2 streams of them: the government-sponsored refugee and private-sponsored refugee. With private-sponsored refugees, some of them are working after 40 days. They are the amount of human capital they had, and even we connected them with the organization, with the group, that they have a huge social capital there. So obviously that works well. As for the Syrian refugee that they came with the 8 children, it's going to be a different story. So we have to look at the children to understand where they are today, because these are the children 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. By the way, there are 60% of the children, government-sponsored refugees are children under 14 years of age, which is quite significant. So we have, and some of these kids, they spend 3, 4 years on the run and in the refugee camp. So I was just talking to some of my colleagues to let's understand them better, where they are, and how we can support them. So definitely on a human capital they bring in, the needs would be different. So when you get somebody who speaks English, who has traveled before, a smaller family, has a chance to get a job, and can connect to the community and start building social capital, so obviously that's much easier process. That's why when we bring private sponsored refugees, these are people that they don't get any support from the government. They have to support themselves eventually, but initially the church group, the mosque, the sponsors that they have brought them in, they would help them sometime for next few months, and then they are on their own. As when we have refugees coming with 8 children, and parents do not have that much social human capital to really exchange with, for a job. So obviously the challenge would be quite different. So it's a longer term. And I think we have to, this is something I always talk to our politicians, that we don't have to bring these people here. But once we bring them, we cannot afford not to do a good job for them, not to fully integrate them, because then we become like some countries that, in Europe, that they're having a huge, huge challenge. In Canada, overall, I would say we have done well. We can do better, but we can't take it for granted because the whole environment has changed, and things that some of the fears that the community has with the recent arrival that we speak to, obviously is different.
Okay, thank you. So now maybe we can talk about the Syrian refugees specifically, and this government initiative to bring 25,000 refugees to Canada in a relatively short period of time. So when you compare sort of a mass arrival like that compared to the normal flow that we would have in Canada, what difference does that make to the practice and the way in which you facilitate refugee resettlement?
So obviously there are different dimensions to that. I think one is basically how the community sees that movement, and that's the one aspect of that. The other aspect is how prepared the agencies like CCIS is to really facilitate that huge number. We've done this thing in the past, and I think with the Kosovo, for instance, we had the similar situation. We had with the Balkan conflict, we had a lot of former Yugoslavian coming, that they were kind of the same situation. But really, more than anything, there was Kosovo, about 13 years ago, experience could be a little bit more relevant to our conversation. This time when the government did that, obviously, there was a political announcement, so they had the time frame they wanted to keep. To us as a practitioner and actually as advisor to the government, we try to influence them to say, okay, it's okay if you don't meet your deadline. If it's a month later or 2 months later, it's going to be okay, but let's make sure we're doing it right. As a result of our conversation, I think the minister have said a few times that we want to do it right. I think that was reassuring to us that this is a good thing that we do that. Now, with the Syrian refugees, we have to recognize there are very distinct two groups that are coming: government-sponsored refugees and private-sponsored refugees. In the case of CCIS and the diocese, I remember in 2013, actually, I called the Bishop of Calgary and said, can I have a conversation? Because a lot of people were coming to our office, because that's when the conflict started, actually, in Syria. And he was getting a lot of people from all walk of life, a lot of, not only Christian, a lot of Muslim would go to him and ask for help. So he called me and said, can we talk? So we got together and we had a conversation. We have a very small but very efficient sponsorship program in Calgary that Antoinette Godbout runs that, and she's been doing that for 30 years. So there's a lot of really capacity there, and very good relationship with the group. So we had a conversation, and then we started actually sponsoring refugees. So we had over 500 refugees that this agency alone sponsored, and almost 400 of them are in Calgary now. So that is how we were prepared for that. So a little bit we were prepared. Probably I would say that maybe Calgary has done a better job than other location in Canada. I think it's not a competition, but because of that preparation, because we were into it long before the refugees arrived. So when the government announced the numbers, so again, the government didn't know the family composition, because that was obviously something they agreed to do, which is, I think, noble for Canadian. We should celebrate that. But they divided that, they took the office November 4th. They wanted to have 15,000 people by actually 15,000 people, I would say, 25,000 people by the government commitment. So how they actually calculate that 25,000, they counted on community-sponsored group for 10,000 of that, and another 15,000 would be government-sponsored refugee. So they wanted to have the first 10,000 to arrive in Canada, on December 31st, 2015, and then by end of February, we have another 15,000. So 25,000 in total will arrive. 10,000 would be government private sponsored, 15,000 government sponsored, which I think are meeting the numbers. I think they have met the first commitment, and they are meeting the second commitment. And then another 10,000 would come the remaining of 2016. So that is, the total would be 35,000 really, not 25,000. 25,000 government-sponsored refugee and 10,000 privately sponsored refugees. So they identified, there was a national conversation. I was part of the national conversation committees talking, and the government tried to really make it a Canadian project, not a government project, and they've been very successful in that, and we can see the contribution by everybody, all the institutions, and that was actually an opportunity for the municipalities to get involved, and the provinces become more involved. So, and in Alberta, we decided, the government agreed, the provincial government agreed to bring up to 3,000 people in Alberta, and so they are here actually. We are meeting our numbers. And one thing happened in Alberta uniquely, and I have to give credit to the provincial government. In this November, they came to 5 areas that we actually have a program called Adjustment Assistance Program, which is a RAP program for initial refugee. They asked us to start mobilizing our communities. So that was actually a good thing we did. So we have, in case of Calgary, we have a steering committee actually, a task force, which is city, education, employment, health, community engagement, the agencies, including us. We are actually, it's in our website, there's a website called Syrian Refugee, or srcalgary.ca, which I suggest your student to look at it. So we organize ourselves. So by the time people came in, we were pretty ready. So we knew the numbers. We didn't know the family composition, but we have our Margaret Chisholm reception house that we can accommodate up to 75 people, but we knew the numbers would be larger than that. So we negotiated with a couple of hotels, and we finally agreed to work with one of them, and we rented 50 rooms, and we started the program. But the good news was when they arrived, although we were all a little bit surprised with the number of children, pleasantly surprised with the number of children, but definitely the school was prepared, the health was prepared, we had doctors going to the lodge, we had doctors at the reception house. The school was quite prepared, they knew what they were doing. So as a result of that, we have actually been very successful, because normally we keep people in a temporary accommodation initially for 3 weeks, but we try to move it to 2 weeks expedited process. And I'm so pleased to know that although we had challenges with the housing that was identified in the beginning, we actually kept that. We are about 15 days average stay in the temporary accommodation. So we had to really reorganize ourselves. We had to sit back and say, okay, in a 2 months period, we almost got 900 or 1,000 people. So we had challenges on the sponsorship agreement holders part, that we were responsible for about 400 of them coming. And also we had another 700 government-sponsored refugees coming. So we had to really work very hard, and hire more staff, more volunteers. And if I tell you, in the past, since maybe November, we worked 16, 17 hours a day. Not only me, my colleagues at CCIS, I'm not exaggerating really. So that is how we managed to get, again, the detail of how we did. We developed the organization structure that works with this particular situation. We engaged different partners. We obviously had the support of all three levels of government. That was a blessing as well. And resources came from IRCC, that's immigration, and province. And trust me, we had one day, not one day, I had to attend 4 or 5 conference calls every day. So from Ottawa till all the way down to the city of Calgary. So that was something that we've done it. We're in the middle of that. We produced the first report. We have already got 80-90% of our numbers. And in the next 2 weeks, we're going to get another probably 200 people or 150 people. So we have made our numbers as we speak today. And we have all the sponsor agreement holders, the private sponsors. So obviously there's no resources for initial settlement, so they go to their sponsor or the church group or other groups that they take care of them. With the refugees from government-sponsored refugee, they have gone to our process. There has been a lot of media report on that, which I may suggest you use that for your course, because we had actually CNN came to us. CNN, there's a report on CNN, so it's all on the internet. You can access those. And a lot of support from the community. One of the challenges we had was how to respond to overwhelming support that people wanted to help. That became actually our major challenge. At the agency level, we always have about 15 to 1,800 volunteers that are helping us with the work we do. But now suddenly I got another 800 people contacted us. I'm sure they contacted the city and other outfits as well, that they wanted to volunteer. So that became a big challenge for us. We wrote them back a nice email to say, yes, thank you very much. We will get back to you. But we really couldn't get back to them because we really overwhelmed with the support that we had. So that is the situation in Calgary.
Thank you. Maybe we can just conclude. I'd like to just ask you how you would define successful refugee resettlement. What does it mean to be successful?
I think that's an excellent question. Actually, this is, as you know, I'm quite involved and have been, and I'm still involved with the Metropolis project. I sat on the board of governance, and I believe in research we do. And I believe that we need to do more research really on the whole notion of settlement integration. So defining success, and I always say that because that's actually something I responded some years ago to a not similar interview, but a conference. It depends whose perspective you're looking at. I think that is very important to look at, because we have different players. We got refugees, we got government, we got community, and you got us as a practitioner, as a settlement community. I think we need to look at different perspective. So and then define the success. I'll give you one example. When we have a family of 10 coming to Canada and they have 8 children under the age of 18, to me as a practitioner, as somebody has done this and have some understanding, I would define success for this family differently than if somebody who came with a husband and wife, both educated, and have one child. You have to look at it differently. From refugees' perspective, they are successful. They're in Canada. They have already succeeded. The children are going to amazing school. The community is there. They're provided the basic need that they have. So they are successful. Actually, was a study done a few years ago, and won't mention the city, but they identified that they indicated that the refugees should be very unhappy. But actually, they were very happy because the indicators that research had created was not the indicated that refugees were looking at. That's why I'm bringing that up for your students. So you have to understand whose perspective you're looking at. So there's a short-term success and there's a long-term success. So I think the government has, obviously, because they invest money and they have public expectation, they want these people suddenly very quickly go to get a job. To me, as a practitioner, when you come to this country, you don't speak any language. And we decided to bring them. And they are even literally in their own language, having 8 children. That itself is a full-time job. So I don't want to put the indicator for success of those people that after 5 years we go and see, okay, this person has not been able to really get a high paid job as a failure. What I would like to see is, and I'm really glad you asked this question, what I like to see is how these 8 children have done. Have they stayed in school? Have they done in school? Are they involved with anything which is not desirable? If not, to me, those could all be translated to the cash, actually. You have 8 children coming here. In 10 years' time, we can make them a loyal, dynamic, educated Canadian. Then this is a success. So the answer to your question is, for us, we have very simple process. There is an initial work we do, and the outcome based to success to us for after 3 weeks or 2 months here. What success means to us: our children at school, our parents engaged in some sort of learning or job. Are they able to function on their own? Can do their banking, go around the city, access public transportation, have some friends, have some social network? If that happened within 3 months, is a success. In a longer term, is these kids are staying in school, is these kids are not getting involved with things that are not desirable, to us is a success. And again, one thing actually makes us to keep going like crazy is because we see the success. I have a case of actually a family came from Kurdistan about 15 years ago. He had actually his 8 children, and everybody thought, oh my God, how is he going to manage? I was at a wedding a few years back, and I saw this young, beautiful woman, very professional looking. They came to me and they said, hi, Mr. Birjandian, how are you? And I said, I didn't know who they are. They were actually the children of that gentleman. But it took some time. They were bankers. They worked with the oil company. One was the teacher. So that is how I think with the long term, we have to look at it. But the fundamental, I said in the beginning, it is a very serious work, especially with the environment we are in, because there's a different environment today than 30 years ago. And some of the challenges that we have now with the community, and the legitimate question, are these people are going to turn out to be? I mean, I'm going to say that because I think your student need to look at that, because of this whole what's happening in Middle Eastern countries, mostly Muslim countries, what the situation that we had in Europe. So it all impacts us as a human being. We are worried. So we had to talk to people quite a bit about, yes, we think that our security agencies in Canada do a good job. So obviously these people are not going to be a terrorist. But again, we are bringing out of these 25,000 people, I would say there would be about 15,000 children. So this is really a job. How are we going to make sure that they feel this is their country? And because the reason I say that, because I worked with some of the European countries, and I talked to a young woman that she was a PhD from Turkey, and 4th generation, I think, or 3rd generation in Germany, but she still didn't feel German. And she was teaching at university. She had PhD. She was just a very articulated, international-minded young lady. But the challenge she had, she was telling me that she can't help it. Every day, something reminds her that she's not a true German. So we have to eliminate that in Canada to make sure that if you are bringing them here, and I tell that to our politicians, you don't have to bring them. But once you bring them here, you can't afford to not do a good job. I think Canada, overall, we have done a good job. But I think there are pockets of mistake we have made. As a result of that, we had in the past 4 years or 3-4 years, 30 young Somalians were killed in Alberta because they came to Alberta and they joined activities that resulted in their death. So obviously we need to look at those and try to make sure this cohort do well.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. Are there any other points that you feel that are important to share about the refugee resettlement process that we've not talked about?
I think I'd like to address the issue of the Syrian refugee, because I get a call at least 1 or 2 a day that people are concerned. Because again, I said, I mean, the whole radicalization that is happening in Europe, we have seen it in Canada, especially with the Islamic extremists. This is a real story. I don't think we can avoid not talking about it. I know that we haven't created the language to talk about it, but it's real. So I get people calling me and asking us, are you guys sure they're not terrorists? And this is a legitimate question because people watch CNN and suddenly they get worried. They love their country, they love their neighborhood, they are willing to help. I haven't seen anybody that they don't want to basically help. But I think there's an expectation that we also have to transfer that to the refugees. Refugees have to recognize that what Canada has done for them is amazing. It's costing taxpayers money, it's costing community resources, but somehow we have to really not brag it every day, but they also have to recognize it is something that Canadians are making sacrifices by investing in this area. And how can we make sure that there's always a conversation? And also there are groups in Alberta, in Canada, that obviously they have, they want to isolate these people. They want them to say, okay, come to us. I think how can we make sure, because they did not come to one particular community in Canada, they came to Canada. So how we set the tone that they become engaged. So my success, you said success. In the next 5 years, if these kids, they do not have other Canadian as their friends, then we have failed. It's very simple. If we find these refugee children, out of 10 friends they have, all of them are Syrian refugees friends, then we have failed, obviously. That's why one of the things I'm advocating in Calgary, and I'm really serious about it, and I have a concern that we end up having all these people in one neighborhood. That's disaster. So those are the things that I would say that in the long term, it would impact our long-term success. So that is the issue of a policy, obviously, and the practices and the whole notion of community.
Well, thank you. This has just been a wonderful interview, Fariborz. I'm so thankful you've been able to take the time today to share your thoughts, both with me and then for the students. I'm really, especially with all of the work that you've got on your plate right now, I'm really most appreciative.
I'm really pleased that I had this opportunity because, again, educating each other is part of that. Obviously, I'm learning. And again, if your students want to visit us or if there are other cities, they should go to those reception houses maybe and just have volunteer for a day or two. And I think that's the best way to really learn and firsthand see how things are working. That would be helpful as well. Now, there are many media coverage. I had actually an interview for half an hour with the Shaw Cable that called Calgary Now, which was a conversation. That was prior actually to arrival. So those are resources I think the students should look at.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Anytime.